Medieval kings lived a paradox, sitting at the absolute top, yet controlling very little directly. Most resources were bottlenecked by middle-tier nobles. To bypass them, emperors granted land to church bishops. Since bishops can't have heirs, the land looped back to the emperor upon death. This wasn't about religion, it was about administration. The survival of the empire relied on the emperor, not the pope, controlling the church's real estate and appointing the men who ran it. But by the mid-11th century, a radical movement was growing inside the monasteries. Reformers were disgusted by secular kings using the church as a puppet, and they found their champion in a man named Hildebrand, the future Pope Gregory VII. In 1075, Gregory issued the Dictatus Papae. It was a revolutionary claim to power, stating that only the Pope could appoint church officials, and that the Pope alone had the authority to depose emperors. This triggered the Investiture Controversy, the decades-long legal and military struggle over investiture, the right to hand a bishop the staff symbolizing his office. Gregory wasn't just looking for spiritual purity. By demanding the right to appoint bishops, the Pope was pulling the primary structural linchpin out of the emperor's entire government. Emperor Henry IV refused to back down, so Gregory excommunicated him. In an instant, Henry's royal scepter and orb lost their sacred authority. His subjects were released from their oaths of loyalty, giving his noble rivals the perfect excuse to launch a civil war. Desperate to save his crown, Henry trekked across the Alps in the dead of winter. He tracked the Pope to the fortress of Canossa, a freezing, isolated stronghold in the Italian mountains. For 3 days, the emperor stood barefoot in the snow, wearing nothing but a rough hair shirt of penance. It was a calculated move. By acting as a humble sinner, he forced the Pope to grant him forgiveness, effectively neutralizing the noble rebellion for a moment. Henry survived the chess match, but the damage was done. He returned to a Germany fractured by war, realizing his old system of ruling through bishops was permanently compromised. With his noble allies in revolt and the church system failing, Henry needed a new source of wealth and soldiers. He needed an ally that didn't care about feudal land rights. He found that ally in the emerging merchant towns. Henry began granting unprecedented trade freedoms and legal protections to cities like Speyer and Worms. This cathedral in Speyer stands as a monument to that era, a massive investment in the urban centers that were becoming the new engines of the economy. This shift included a specific, pragmatic alliance with Jewish financiers. These ruins of the Speyer synagogue are physical evidence of a community that Henry placed under his direct protection. He designated them chamber servants, granting them the right to trade and govern themselves in exchange for funding his reign. This created a new economic reality. The emperor traded urban rights for liquid capital, cash in the form of taxes and loans. For the first time, a king could pay for a mercenary army with gold rather than relying on the fickle loyalty of landowning lords. To survive a stalemate with the Pope, a desperate emperor had accidentally accelerated the rise of the independent commercial city and the merchant class. The original combatants didn't live to see the resolution. Gregory died in exile, and Henry was eventually overthrown by his own son. Their final years were consumed by chaos, a cycle of war that neither side could truly win. In 1122, their successors finally reached a compromise known as the Concordat of Worms. After 50 years of civil war, both sides were ready to settle for a shared jurisdiction. The treaty split the authority over a bishop into 2 parts. The Pope gave the bishop his spiritual authority, the ring and the staff, while the emperor granted the bishop his worldly lands and secular responsibilities. This legal distinction codified the split between sacred and secular authority. It created a permanent boundary between church and state, a concept that would eventually become a cornerstone of Western legal tradition. A theological stalemate over a bishop's staff had forced the empire to find a new way to fund itself. By proving a kingdom could run on urban trade and liquid capital, this conflict created a structural alternative to the old hierarchy, one that would eventually leave the feudal pyramid behind.